So our next panellist is Ali Jones. Many of you will know Ali actually. So she started as actually a stage manager at Court Theatre, moved into television as a floor manager, and ended up then being in front of the camera on the regional TV news programme in the late 1980s and early 90s, the Mainland Touch. Okay, it was in your bio.
I know, just edited.
So she also worked on news for the Deaf News Review. She's worked in commercial radio on C93 and was named 1991 Young Broadcaster of the Year for Independent Broadcasters. She went overseas and in the 90s returned to New Zealand. She's worked at CTV reading news and as a news editor in the CTV newsroom, subsequently at News Talk ZB, and took over from Mike Yardley as the morning talk host. Ali's also been on RNZ. She's had stints as the host for Jim Moore's Afternoon, filling in, and has been a guest on the panel. She now runs her own PR company, Red PR. She's extensive experience in the PR sector since 2000, working mainly in the health and education sectors. And she was also Christchurch City Councillor and is currently Community Board Chair for the Papanui Innis Ward. So please give Ali a very warm round of applause.
Thank you. I'd written a rather boring diatribe, so I'm actually not going to read any of this. After listening to what everyone has had to say, I found your presentation inspiring, Paul, to the point that it has encouraged me to look at perhaps doing some university study, which I never did. I wanted to do, but discovered theatre and got dragged into that. I looked at issues around Facebook, what's going on with media in New Zealand. Is Facebook out of control? Some of the headlines that we were, or some of the topics that we were sort of given to look at. But what I want to focus on is more the third point that was raised with us about, can social media be a public service? And you mentioned this, Paul, you referred to it. And you said maybe social media can encourage, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but maybe social media can encourage grassroots connections and establishing groups. What I want to talk about primarily is the work, none of the stuff that Paul actually mentioned, which is what I mainly do, but I also work in the advocacy area, trying to help people with their insurance claims, calling out some of the behaviour and performance of EQC, working to have protests, and one of the things that I found extremely helpful, and others have raised this as well over the last 8 years, is social media. So after the earthquakes, during the earthquakes actually, there was a real desire for people to connect. And once we got over those initial issues of mobile phones being down and some of those connections being somewhat challenging, people went to websites, they used Twitter. When I was campaigning to be a councillor in 2013, I knocked on a few doors and a few people said, "Oh yes, I know you from Twitter." So, that's quite incredible. So the connectivity and the connections that are made through social media at times of stress, of disconnection, are really important. And they made a big difference in our communities and during the last 8 years when it's come to learning about issues around policies, around the EQC Act. I mean, how many of us had even heard of liquefaction before? 2010 and 2011, and now, in fact, sometimes I can meet with people and we're having conversations that sound as though we're engineers or we are lawyers or we are experts in some area, when in fact they're just conversations that we have regularly had over the last 8 years, and we have stood to be corrected, and we have been corrected, and we've learnt new things. And that's been really important. And one of the people that comes up regularly in our discussions around this is broadcaster John Campbell. Now, like him or not, and it's not a personal thing, he did some amazing things for us in Christchurch with regards to keeping the issues in Christchurch in front of the nation. And he continued to do that in the face of, I understand, others not wanting him to do that. And perhaps to his detriment, to the point that he actually then moved on from TV3, who knows. But without him coming to Christchurch, without him getting people like Mr. Simpson on television and challenging him in an intelligent, not in a I've got you kind of way, which I find incredibly frustrating when I listen to some interviewing that goes on at the moment actually, He was trying to get answers to intelligent and logical questions. And when he didn't get those answers, he held people to account in delivering those answers. The Southern Response efforts that we put into the protests with Steve Gurney, those were broadcast on his program Campbell Live, and after that those issues were raised again on RNZ. Now, without him doing that, we don't believe we would have seen the changes that we subsequently saw in some of the behaviours around Southern Response and EQC. So my point is, with regards to some of the commentary that we've heard today, there's a huge question around social media, and I see this morning too that Stephen Franks has come out, the coalition spokesman for Coalition of Freedom of Speech, I think it is, his group. He has come out and basically said that what has happened with the New Zealand chief censor, David Shanks, outlawing the gunman's manifesto with regards to what happened in the last couple of weeks, is crossing the line, that it has gone too far. He has said most New Zealanders will have no interest in reading the rants of an evil person. Kiwis should not be wrapped in cotton wool with their news and information censored. Now, I've got more questions than answers over some of the things that have been happening in the last week or so, and I'm very interested to see what my colleagues will say. But I raise that because the positives that I've mentioned with regards to social media, the positives around being able to socialise and share information that we otherwise may not know and learn from that, has been invaluable in people being able to get their lives back and learn things that we wouldn't have known otherwise. On the other hand, I see these other issues as things we have to question and discuss. It's continuing a conversation. I was absolutely intrigued by reading the Commons report in the UK, which was an 18-month inquiry into disinformation. It covered individuals' rights over privacy with regards to social media. And reading some of the commentary around that was fascinating. The Guardian tech journalist Simon Jenkins, who's also a broadcaster, he said British electoral law is puny, it is unfit for purpose, leaving elections vulnerable to foreign influence, disinformation and voter manipulation. Not a week passes without evidence that cyber security is inadequate and public services have been left vulnerable to hacking. Now, what he said is it's a difficult conversation to have it as a complex issue, but that still shouldn't mean that we don't have it and we make some tough decisions. We've seen tough decisions made in the last few days in New Zealand over the gun laws, for example. Now, I know that they are different issues, but where you have a difficult issue doesn't mean that you shouldn't actually grab it by the horns and do something about it. I do feel a bit of a fake. I'm with people here who are far more experienced and qualified to talk about these issues than I.
Don't worry.
So I will be very interested to hear what you have to say and what my colleagues have to say as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex.